In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Old Testament reading today comes from the book of Deuteronomy, a name that means second law. Not because it was a whole new law given to augment or replace the one given in Exodus and Numbers and Leviticus, but because it was a restatement and summary of that law, along with a few details relevant to the upcoming conquest of Canaan. The setting for this restatement of the law is as follows. Israel has completed their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and the generations that had been in charge of things when they came out of Egypt and when God first spoke to them from Mount Sinai have now passed from the scene. And Moses, who has led them this whole while, is himself about to join them, to die and be succeeded by Joshua. And Moses does not want to leave these young whippersnappers without his guidance, but he has to. So he wants to give them first a review of recent history, and especially the things that God has commanded for them to do when they come into this new land that they have been waiting to acquire. Hence this second law, or second public proclamation of the law. This context helps us understand our reading. The people, when Moses is giving this recitation, must be disturbed by the fact that he is so old and that he is about to leave them. The grand old man is saying farewell. Who is going to come after him? He was the father of his nation, and he had been for as long as they had been a nation, distinct from Egypt. We call George Washington the father of our country, but he doesn't have half the claim to that as Moses had to be the father of his. Washington led his people in a successful war for independence and then served as their chief executive for 8 years. But Moses had led his people out of slavery in Egypt through the working of great miracles, and then through the Red Sea in such a way as to destroy the pursuing army, and then had led them for 40 years, not as chief executive, but as the prophet whose word was law, through whom God continued to do miracles, such as the manna that preserved them in the wilderness, and the great victories that he gave them against the Amalekites and the Amorites, and the law that he gave them that was going to define them as a nation. Moses was like all the founding fathers rolled into one. And that's just when we're talking about the political side of things. He went way beyond politics. He was the living voice of God among them. His death was going to be a big event. So one of the things that he tells the people in this long farewell speech is that God is going to send them someone else like him. And that's where our reading begins. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. Now these words remind the Israelites that nothing Moses has given them, nothing that Moses has done for them, has originated with Moses. God raised him up. God has been the benefactor, the wonder worker, the lawgiver who has done everything through Moses. And God's not about to die, nor will he suddenly find it hard to help his people Israel once Moses is dead. Moses has only been a tool, and a good one, but not indispensable. God is quite capable of raising up a prophet like me from among you, and he will do it. Moses is concerned that the people take this to heart and don't lose their heads the way we read that they did the one other time Moses disappeared for a period of time up on Mount Sinai, and they made a golden calf. It is to him you shall listen, he says of the coming prophet. And you notice the phrasing of that in our translation suggests that it means to him as opposed to someone else. And if we back up a few verses before our reading, we see that is in fact the case. In his rehearsal of the law, Moses has gotten to the part of it that prohibits divination and fortune-telling and human sacrifice and inquiring of the dead. He reminds the people, when you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. And he lists the forbidden sorcerous practices and then continues, For these nations which you are about to dispossess, listen to fortune tellers and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. So we see that our reading begins in mid-thought, actually. Moses is saying, now that I am leaving you, you may be especially vulnerable to this kind of thing. I have been the firm hand guiding you in the ways of the Lord. And now that I am gone, you may be tempted to seek revelations from other sources, from forbidden sources, contrary to the true God. You must not do that. You must not hear these fortune tellers and diviners, but there will be someone that you should listen to. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. So who is Moses talking about? In the sermon that St. Peter preached on the day of Pentecost, he quotes this verse we've been discussing. And he says that this is one of the prophecies that is being fulfilled through the coming of Jesus Christ. Stephen, the first martyr, also quotes it just before he is stoned, as he is giving his defense before the court. And though he does not link it explicitly to Jesus, there was no other reason for him to be bringing it up in that context. And we know from a recent gospel reading that the Jews did identify this prophecy as a messianic prophecy. That's why they asked John the Baptist when he started baptizing, "Are you Elijah?" And then, "Are you the prophet?" And in 2 weeks from now, in our gospel reading for the Transfiguration, we will hear of the Father's voice speaking from that bright cloud, speaking to Peter and James and John in the very miraculous presence of Moses and saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And it makes a great deal of sense in the big picture that we Christians are privileged to see. The passing of Moses is an epical event. God has used him to build his people Israel out of nothing. And the next big event on such a scale in the history of the people of God, where God does miracles every day and speaks to them like he did through Moses, is going to be Jesus. Looking back to such an occasion, we might expect that a prophecy like this, showing the next big landmark, would be given. Abraham gives birth to Israel. Moses establishes Israel as a nation under God's law. Jesus fulfills the promise made to Abraham and the law given through Moses and extends this nation of God's people to the Gentiles also. And Jesus fits the prophecy very well. A prophet like me from among your brothers. And then especially this part. Moses reminds the Israelites of the day that God descended in fire and smoke on Mount Sinai and addressed them in a great and terrible voice, giving the 10 Commandments, scaring them right properly. So they appealed to Moses and said, "Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire anymore, lest I die." And Moses accordingly went up onto the terrible mountain himself alone, and then came back with the tablets of stone, and continued throughout his ministry to relay to them the words of the Lord. The promise of the coming prophet like Moses is based on this same principle. Moses said, "The Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words into his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him." This latter Moses will be, like the first Moses, a mediator who stands between a just and uncompromising God and his weak and frightened people, who goes up into the mountain when all of his brothers yearn to flee from it, who returns from it with divine words that he can utter in a human voice. And if we remember the way those days at Mount Sinai unfolded, a mediator who can plead for the life of his people when they go into great sin and would build a golden calf to worship instead. Jesus is that mediator who, like Moses, goes into the very presence of God and speaks to him, who can come and present God to us in a human face. He is very like Moses. In fact, it's probably more accurate to say that Moses is very like Jesus in this regard. And Jesus is also the ultimate figure of whom it can be said, whoever will not listen to my words that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. Because as important as Moses ever was for Israel, Jesus is more important than that for Israel and every other nation. His gospel alone can save sinners from their just deserts. His voice must be listened to for salvation. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. But let's go back to the day that Moses revealed this to his fellow Israelites, and let's remember the things that we have said about that context. How the Israelites needed reassurance of an immediate sense for the fact that Moses was about to go away and they were going to be exposed to false religious influences. And Moses has explicitly said, don't listen to them, listen to this prophet that will be raised up instead. It seems he must be talking about something more than someone who's coming in 1400 years, who none of his hearers are going to get to interact with in their lifetime. And then there's also this part of our reading at the end. The last verse says, but the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I've not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. So look, we're talking about multiple prophets all of a sudden. We haven't had a change of subject. The prophet that God will raise up from your brothers who is like me is the subject, and now we're talking about multiple prophets. What does this mean? How do we understand this? When we talk about the prophet, singular, the one like Moses, we are also talking about the prophets, plural. Because before Moses, there was no prophet of that kind that we are accustomed to reading about in the Old Testament. There were people that God spoke to before him, yes. Adam, for one example, Abraham, for another. There were people who were able to tell the future. Joseph, by interpreting dreams at least, was able to tell the future. But there is no figure before Moses who arrives on the scene with a mission from God and said, this is a message that God has given me for you, and you had best listen to it and act accordingly. Let my people go, and all that follows. But after Moses, that is the model of the prophet. The template, the model in your mind of a biblical prophet is the template of Moses. It's Moses's job description. And that's true no matter what Old Testament prophet you're thinking about. Elijah, Elisha, Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jonah, even a New Testament prophet like Agabus, or like Jesus himself. In our gospel reading today, they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. All these prophets, they follow in the pattern that God established with Moses. And the first of these prophets was immediately coming after Moses, his successor Joshua. And we don't normally think of Joshua as a prophet, but God spoke to him, and God told him to tell Israel things on his behalf that Israel then must do. The example of this that will loom largest in our minds is when they took the city of Jericho. How did the people know to march around that city in that particular strange pattern that many times for that many days? God told Joshua in a private conference, and then Joshua told the people. Or maybe I should call him Yeshua, because in Hebrew, that is the name. And in Hebrew, that is also the name Jesus. Joshua and Jesus are the same name. So yes, the prophet like Moses is ultimately Jesus, the one who is even greater than Moses, the one who fulfills everything. But before he sent the Yeshua who had opened the heavenly promised land to all believers, he sent the Yeshua who had opened the earthly promised land to the people Israel by leading them to conquer it. And then after that, God sent his people a whole series of prophets, of people he had raised up from the brothers, from among them, placeholders to meet them where they were and to help them be true in the meantime. And they were all like Moses too. And they were similarly like Jesus. If you think about it, just like the high priests of Israel, who had a succession that went all the way from Aaron down to the high priest who condemned Jesus to die. And they were placeholders for the priestly role of Jesus. And then once the kingship was established in Israel, there was also a line of kings who were anticipating Jesus and how he would rule over his people Israel. These things anticipated the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises in the one man who would combine all three of these offices and be our prophet, our priest, and our king. So the promise that God gives through Moses to his people Israel is ultimately fulfilled in Christ, and it is fulfilled in an anticipatory way for all the generations in between by the prophets. And God continues to send prophets to perform a similar task for you today. One of them is standing before you. And I am not claiming that I am exactly on the model of Moses. I am not going to perform any miracles, I don't expect. I also don't expect to have any private revelations from the Lord that I am commanded to reveal to you. But I have the scriptures. I have a whole book of revelations that have been accorded to me, and I have an advantage that none of the prophets before Jesus had. And that is, I am not before Jesus anymore. Jesus has come. Jesus has come in the flesh. He has lived and he has died for the sins of the world, and he has established his church, and he has given it power that the old people of God were not given. I don't have to have the special individual power of a Moses or an Elijah. I have the gifts that Christ gave his church, the forgiveness of sins that we had this morning, without even sacrificing an animal, for each and every one of you at one particular place in the earth. This is a powerful gift. This is an amazing gift that the old people of God did not have, to hear the forgiveness of sins so simply from the lips of a man. And the sacrament of the altar, the body and blood of God himself, of the God-man who was sacrificed for the forgiveness of your sins. Jesus has already come, and he has given his church these powerful placeholders until such a time as he reveals himself at the end and all is fulfilled. So do not listen to the world. Do not listen to the soothsayers. Do not listen to the ones who spin a worldview that is contrary to Christianity. Listen to the prophets that God has raised up from among you, who speak his word and who administer his sacraments. Them you shall listen to, because when you do, you are listening to Christ. In the name of Jesus, amen.